Good morning. Welcome to the third conference on the state of the judiciary here at Georgetown Law. Justice Breyer, Justice Souter, we're honored by your presence. And Justice O'Connor, thank you for the confidence you've shown in Georgetown by choosing it as the setting for your project on the state of the judiciary and for this conference. Thank you, President DeGioia, for being here, and to our keynote speaker, Dr. Alan Greenspan. Thanks also to the members of the Georgetown Law Board of Visitors who have joined us today, and to all of our guests. This year's conference, Our Courts and Corporate Citizenship, will explore the relationship of corporations to our judicial system. Corporations occupy a crucial and privileged role in the American legal system. That role provides an important and unique perspective on law, and it also confers responsibilities of citizenship. One such responsibility, I believe, is support for a fair and independent judiciary, which is a hallmark of the rule of law and without which corporations could not thrive. Corporations, as significant consumers of the legal and judicial services, have a vital stake in the functioning of our courts. And those of you who run and advise corporations can have a powerful voice in the public debate over the importance of an independent judiciary. We are here today to start that conversation. This conference could not have been possible without the efforts of many people. Our Sandra Day OConnor Project Steering Committee has provided tremendous guidance, as has the Faculty Steering Committee, Viet Din, Julie O'Sullivan, Jane Stromseth, James Foreman, all Justice O'Connor clerks, and Professor Roy Shotland. Meryl Chertoff, the director of the Sandra Day OConnor Project, has worked tirelessly along with her staff, Abigail Taylor, Carissa Tesaro, and Josh Deal. And thanks to the foundation, corporate, and private donors who have contributed to making this conference possible. And also thanks to Judy Areen, who helped bring the first of these conferences to Georgetown Law in 2006. Now, we're all here today because of Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. She joins us here at the law school for a third straight year. Justice O'Connor, during both her time on the bench and in the past few years, has taken a leading role in educating Americans about civic participation of citizenship. It's a thrill to have her here again at Georgetown Law today to speak about corporate citizenship. Ladies and gentlemen, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor.
Good morning, and thank you, Dean Aleinikoff, for once again letting us have a meeting here at this distinguished law school, and thank each and every one of you in this room for being part of this today. We've talked for 2 years previously about aspects of the importance of an independent judiciary, and we've narrowed the focus of this year's conference to take a look at business and corporations and their role in the maintenance of an independent judiciary. And I think that corporations and businesses are in a special position by virtue of their economic importance in our country. And we're surely focused on that these days. You matter, and we need to know what will help make our system recover quickly and do well. Corporations stand to lose large amounts if in judicial independence waivers, or if we have methods of resolving disputes that are not fair and effective. And there are a number of ways in which businesses view the current court situation as a failure. Some see runaway juries creating unpredictability. Some see litigation delay and expensive discovery processes that greatly increase the cost and time of litigation. And the judiciary possibly is increasingly made up of judges younger who lack experience with complex business issues. And these are real concerns that need to be addressed. And there's not total satisfaction with alternative dispute resolution either. So we're going to talk about all of these factors, and these are concerns, and that's why we have asked you to be part of this discussion today. I think the starting point, I hope, will be agreement that we do benefit by having a qualified, fair, and independent judicial branch. I mean, that is significant. We also have to have a fair and appropriate alternative dispute resolution system if people are going to use that for the resolution of disputes. Now, some states, among the 50 states, have had success in maintaining an independent judiciary and have done pretty well. Others have not done as well. And as the selection of state court judges becomes ever more political, I think the interests of all sides have been pouring a great deal of money into state judicial races. And I think in the long term, that kind of a system undermines our notions and standards for an independent judiciary, and I think that long-term business interests ultimately suffer too when that happens. So justice is a special commodity. The more you pay for it, maybe the less it's worth. And I don't want to talk in economic terms with Dr. Greenspan speaking after me this morning, but I do think that's right. There were times in our country's history where justice was for sale, and frankly, it wasn't worth much. Judge Roy Bean famously ran his courthouse out of a saloon in West Texas, not too far from where I was born and went to school. And everyone in Roy Bean's court, from jurors to lawyers, was expected to buy drinks during each of his recesses. And if you didn't buy a drink, you were held in contempt by Judge Bean, and you were fined the cost of a drink. And his courthouse had a big sign in front that read, "Law West of the Pecos." And just above the sign was another sign that said, "Ice cold beer." Now, I would have hoped at least that the law part would have gotten top billing, but it didn't. He was selling ice cold beer and law in that order, I suppose because beer is the easier sell. Now, in one case, Judge Bean sentenced a young man to hang for a murder. And the story goes, Judge Bean gave him a chance to write a farewell letter to his mother before the execution. And he did, and Judge Bean peered over his shoulder as the sentenced man wrote to his mother that she should retrieve the $400 in his bank account. Now, that was quite a bit of money in those days. And Judge Bean, sensing there might be some profit in leniency, screamed, "By God, we've made a mistake. This man does not deserve to die." Well, it's important to remember that the justice for sale environment of the Old West was not business friendly in any sense. The law was chaotic. It was difficult to have faith that the government would enforce property or contract rights, because for every Judge Bean who might be in your pocket, there was another one in somebody else's pocket. And while we've come a long way since those days, I worry that we're inching sort of backwards as money creeps its way back into the judicial races and into our courts. And the pendulum of judicial bias swings both ways. Once you hang the for sale sign on the courthouse door, you can't predict who the buyer is going to be. As Alexander Hamilton put it, a steady, upright, and impartial administration of the law is essential, because no man can be sure that he may not be tomorrow the victim of a spirit of injustice, by which he might be the gainer today. And I think the same is true of judicial campaigns. As plaintiff and defendant-friendly groups each race to pour more money into campaigns to get their candidate elected, the only result they're assured of is that the rule of law is going to suffer. So I think if both sides in one of these elections unleash their weapons, as they've started to do, that both the judiciary's impartiality and the public's perception of it are going to suffer, and have suffered, actually. And recent campaigns for judicial positions in Wisconsin and West Virginia give some picture of how this can emerge, and I think we're going to hear a little bit about those today. I hope today we can discuss some ways that these competing interests might come to the table and negotiate sort of a ceasefire, if you will, for everyone's benefit. There may be some reluctance on the part of some major associations that represent business interests to even come to the table and discuss these issues. At least we experienced that today. And I thank each of you who did come today, and I hope you understand the value of having an open dialogue about these issues, and I hope you're going to reach out after today to other groups and engage them in discussions too. We may disagree about the best steps that we should take to address the situation today, but I hope we can get general agreement, at least, that an independent judiciary is important to all of us, whether citizens or businesses. And I'd like to welcome today someone I know has been very committed to education, to academic excellence for a very long time, both when he was a student at Georgetown University and now that he is president of this marvelous university. Help me welcome Georgetown President John DeGioia.
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to join you this morning for this important conference that will explore the relationship between the judiciary and the market. And it's appropriate that this conference, this crucial discussion of our court system, take place here on this campus and in this city. Georgetown was founded in 1789, just 9 months before the United States Constitution was ratified, and has a rich tradition in the areas of law, business, and public policy. For 2 centuries, we have also brought together distinguished public servants and scholars to investigate the pressing issues of our time. For their participation and instrumental support of the conference, there are some people I'd like to also recognize this morning. Most especially, I wish to thank Justice O'Connor, both for her remarks and for bringing us all together today to discuss this matter of such great importance. But I also wish to acknowledge Justice Breyer and Justice Souter, members of the Board of Visitors of our law school, the many distinguished federal and state judges. I also would like to express my deep appreciation to Aleinikoff, the dean of our law school, for hosting this event and for serving as home for the Sandra Day O'Connor project. Alex is one of the great leaders in American legal education, and we're grateful to him for his leadership. The Sandra Day O'Connor project is an initiative, as you know, which began in 2006 to critically examine the independence of our courts. For this year's conference on how the perception of partisanship in the judiciary affects market functions, I have the pleasure of presenting to you Dr. Alan Greenspan, a dedicated and principled public servant who's made a career of studying how our market responds to social changes. From an early age, Dr. Greenspan had an aptitude for mathematics, whether he was remembering baseball batting averages or performing large calculations in his head at the age of 5. In the early 1940s, he studied clarinet at Juilliard and later joined trumpeter Henry Jerome's big band. Even then, Dr. Greenspan's affinity for economics was obvious. He was, of course, the clarinetist who could also fill out his bandmates' income tax forms for them. Soon after this, he began studying economics as an undergraduate at New York University. Later, he continued his education in NYU's graduate, completing his doctorate. In the meantime, in 1954, he co-founded Townsend Greenspan and Company, Inc., an economic consulting firm. And in 1974, he was nominated by President Ford as the chairman of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. His extensive preparation and expertise in the position of chairman of the Federal Reserve in 1987, appointed by President Reagan. During his 18 years in that position, he presided over the largest economic expansion in United States history. Throughout his career in public service, he has worked in a bipartisan manner. In these partnerships, he achieved great respect for his actions designed to limit negative economic developments, his deep understanding of market mechanisms and the dynamism and often unpredictability of a free market economy, and his appreciation of the need for collaboration in forging successful solutions for unforeseen changes in the economy. In our present situation, with the fairness of our courts being questioned, and with the historic challenge to market stability that we are facing, we must reaffirm our commitments to fair law and sound market principles. This conference offers the chance to explore relationships between corporations and courts as institutions, and between the effect of court decisions, especially those that may be perceived as partisan, on the economy and on the market. It is especially in this moment of such volatility, when there is perhaps unprecedented debate about the programs and policies that have contributed to our current economic and judicial landscape, that we must come together just like this, in the hope that together we can reach thoughtful, fair solutions for the problems in our markets and our courts. We are indeed fortunate to have with us this morning a man whose life has been committed to the search for. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Alan Greenspan.
Thank you so much, President DeGioia. I am most delighted to participate in this Sandra Day O'Connor Project Conference. During a week like this, we realize just how much we miss someone with Justice O'Connor's talents in public life, particularly her ability to work out compromises on difficult issues. It's also a time when we realize that the branch of government she once served seems to be the only one that's still functioning. It's safe to say that Justice O'Connor's record of public service tells us who she is, and we commend her for the Western common sense she brought to her career at the Supreme Court. We wish only there was more of it. This is especially the case since we are living through the type of wrenching financial crisis that comes along only once in a century. Financial markets freeze up as an excess of fear displaces a protracted period of what some might call irrational exuberance. Eventually, the market freeze will thaw as frightened investors take tentative steps towards re-engagement with risk. Broken market ties among banks, pension and hedge funds, and all types of non-financial businesses will become reestablished, and our complex economy that has the capacity to produce a fifth of the world's goods and services will reemerge. When asked how the U.S. economy, in little more than a century, achieved the highest standard of living in the world, outpacing all others, and then sustaining that lead for another century, my response has always been, it's the Constitution of the United States. Critical to economic growth is a rule of law, particularly protection of the rights of individuals and property. While it is true that over the decades the vast majority of investors have come to our shores to participate in a vibrant, open economy, a remarkably large number have simply viewed the United States as a safe haven for their savings that was not available in their home countries. Our Constitution accords citizens to those who invest here under U.S. law. Short of a few ambiguous incidents, I can think of no circumstances where an expanded rule of law and enhanced property rights have failed to increase material prosperity. It has been startling over the years to see that even a little private ownership, what a little private ownership will do. When 3 decades ago, China granted highly diluted rights to ownership to the rural residents who tilled owned agricultural plots, yield per acre and rural standards of living rose significantly. And it was an embarrassing stain on the Soviet Union's central planning that a very substantial percentage of its crops came from so-called privately owned plots that covered only a small fraction of tilled land. As living requires physical property, food, clothing, homes, people need the legal protection to own and dispose of such property without the threat of arbitrary confiscation by the state or mobs in the street. To be sure, people have to and do survive in totalitarian, centrally planned societies where individual property rights are de minimis. But theirs is a lesser existence. The ability to own and dispose of property under a rule of law, a notion spawned by the 18th century's Enlightenment, spread through Europe and North America. It produced new ways to organize society's pursuit of the industrial means required for people to survive and hopefully prosper. Prior to the Enlightenment, people could barely improve upon their short and miserable lives. Indeed, for generation after generation, people tilled the same plots of land. Material progress was marginal at best. Global life expectancy was 25 years, unchanged for a millennium. Since the early 18th century, however, the force of the rule of law has fostered standards of living by 20 times in that part of the world that embraced competitive markets. Life expectancy more than doubled, and in the developing countries, central planning for markets since the end of the Cold War, hundreds of millions of people have been elevated from subsistence poverty. Other hundreds of millions are now experiencing a level of affluence that people born in developed nations have experienced all their lives. Regrettably, the notion of rights of ownership of capital and other income-earning assets remains conflicted, especially in societies that still believe that profit-seeking is not quite moral. A key purpose of property rights, after all, is to protect assets in order to use them to profit or personally benefit. Such rights are not supportable in a society that holds any significant remnant of the view of property as theft. That notion, embraced by Karl Marx and others, rests on the presumption that gained wide acceptance in the first half of the 20th century that wealth created under a division of labor is produced jointly and hence should be owned collectively. Any rights inhering in an individual therefore must be stolen from society as a whole. Classical economists led by Adam Smith a prominent figure of the Enlightenment, in contrast, developed the notion of the marginal contribution of each individual to the production process as the basis of his or her incomes. Implicitly, Smith's followers argued that Marx's view of society was inconsistent with human nature and therefore could not explain economic development. Marx did recognize that acquisitive human nature was not compatible with a collectivized state, but he postulated a change of human nature fostered by communism. It took many generations to prove him wrong. With the exception of a few diehards, none of today's communist leaders hold to that orthodoxy. In the West, the moral validity of property rights is accepted or at least acquiesced in by virtually the whole of the population. This is true even in societies which are disdainful of competition. Attitudes towards property ownership are passed from one generation to the next through family values and education. These attitudes derive from the deepest values governing social interaction that people hold. Even in non-democratic ways where property rights are embraced, standards of living do improve. But democracies with a free press and protection of minority rights have proved the most effective form to safeguard property, largely because democracies rarely allow discontent to rise to a point that leads to explosive changes in economic regimes. Capitalism under authoritarian rule, on the other hand, is inherently unstable because it forces aggrieved citizens to seek redress outside the law. While the debate over property rights and democracy will doubtless persist, I was taken with an observation made by Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize winner in economics. In the terrible history of famines in the world, he noted, no substantial famine has ever occurred in any independent and democratic country with a relatively free press. We cannot find exceptions to this rule, no matter where we look. I agree. With the media in authoritarian regimes, self-censorship, market interventionist policies, the most prevalent cause of disrupted distribution of food, go unreported and uncorrected until too late. Protection of property has always been a moving target as the law continually tries to keep up with the nature of economic change. It's not surprising that different cultures have different views as to whether and to what extent property should be protected. This issue is becoming pronounced as property is becoming increasingly intellectual. How appropriate is our current system of intellectual property protection, developed for a world in which physical assets predominated, for an economy in which value increasingly is embodied in ideas rather than tangible capital? Arguably one of the single most important economic decisions our lawmakers and courts will face in the next 25 years is to clarify the rules of intellectual property. The coming difficulties were anticipated almost 4 decades ago by a young Stephen Breyer writing in the Harvard Law Review. In my favorite quote of a book I wrote last year, the future Supreme Court Justice noted, "The case for copyright rests not upon proven need, but upon uncertainty as to what would happen if protection were removed. One may suspect that the risk of harm is small, but the world without copyright is nonetheless, in the words of Hamlet, undiscovered country which puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of." The demonstrable driver of economic progress is competition. I cannot improve on Adam Smith's identification in his Wealth of Nations. The natural effort of every individual to better his own condition, when suffered to exert itself with freedom and security, is so powerful a principle that it is alone and without any assistance capable of carrying on society to wealth and prosperity. People generally do not exert the effort to accumulate the capital necessary for economic growth unless they can own it. Clearly, the increased concentration of income that have emerged under technological advance and global competition have rekindled the battle between the cultures of socialism and capitalism, a battle some thought had ended once and for all with the disgrace of central planning. But over the past year, some of the critical pillars underlying market competition arguably have failed. A worldwide debate on the future of globalization and capitalism is being intensified by the current crisis. Its resolution will define the world's marketplace and the way we live for decades to come. As I've noted, competitive markets and by extension globalization and capitalism cannot be sustained without the support of a large proportion of society. The rule of law under which capitalist economic institutions function must be perceived as fair if these institutions are to continue to receive broad support. The only way to temper the animus against an economy that requires high labor turnover to prosper is to continue to support market incentives that create jobs and to find productive ways to ease the pain of job losers. That problem is not new. The recent growing inequality of income, however, is new and requires insight into its roots and policy actions where appropriate. Another important requirement for the proper functioning of market competition is also not often, if ever, covered in lists of factors contributing to economic growth and standards of living. Trust in the word of others. Where the rule of law prevails, despite everyone's right to legal redress of a perceived grievance, if there is more than a small fraction of outstanding contracts that require adjudication, court systems would be overwhelmed, as would society's ability to be governed by the rule of law. This implies that in a free society governed by the rights and responsibilities of its citizens, the vast majority of transactions must be voluntary, which of necessity presupposes trust in the word of those with whom we do business, in almost all cases, strangers. It is remarkable that large numbers of contracts, especially in financial markets until recent advances in information technology, were initially oral, confirmed by a written document only at a later time, even after much price movement. It is remarkable how much trust we have in the pharmacist who fills the prescription ordered by our physician, or the trust of automakers that their motor vehicles will run as certified. We are not fools. We bank on the self-interest of our counterparties with whom we trade to foster and protect their reputation for producing quality goods and services. Just contemplate how little division of labor and wealth creation would be engendered if that were not the prevailing culture in which we lived. Wealth creation requires people to take risks. It cannot be created otherwise. Thus, we cannot be sure our actions to enhance our material well-being will succeed. But the greater our ability to trust in the people with whom we trade, that is, the more enhanced their reputation, the greater the accumulation of wealth. In a market system based on trust, reputation has significant economic value. I am therefore distressed at how far we have let concerns for reputation slip in recent years. Reputation and trust it fosters have always appeared to me to be the core attribute required of competitive markets. Laws at best can prescribe only a small fraction of the day-by-day activities in the marketplace. When trust is lost, a nation's ability to transact business is palpably undermined. In the marketplace, uncertainties created by not always truthful counterparties raise credit risk and thereby increase real interest rates and weaker economies. During the past year, a lack of trust in the validity of accounting records of banks and other financial institutions in the context of inadequate capital led to a massive hesitancy in lending to them. The result has been a freezing up of credit. As I noted in my opening remarks, trust will eventually reemerge as investors dip hesitatingly back into the marketplace. From that point, history tells us financial and economic revival sets in. I suspect it will be sooner rather than later. In either event, human nature being what it is, revival will come. It always has in this society, governed by that remarkable document we call the Constitution of the United States. Thank you very much.